when you understand it and apply it, integrate it, you won't experience anxiety unless you choose to. And there's no reason to choose anxiety because that prepares you for fight or flight, which tends to shut out other options. It's going to move you into a fixed mindset. And there's so many other factors that go on. We don't need the cortisol going through our body. Now, very little of what I talk about is going to be brand new. You have heard it before. You've seen it before. You can Google just about every term I use. And I use regular language instead of neuroscience language because I want to keep it accessible. And this is about learning to drive the car. It's like driving the car instead of understanding how the car works. You don't need to understand turbocharger versus fuel injection, which can go together, a throttle body versus carburetor. You don't need to understand how a transmission works, how many gears, how many speeds your transmission is. Does it have 3-speed automatic, or is it a 3-speed automatic, or is it a 7-speed automatic? It doesn't matter to you. You just get in and drive the car. And that's what I'm doing here with the 7-step process. You know, we can go into a deep dive and understand the neuroscience behind it, but you don't have to. You can learn to drive your system the way it was designed just by going through this, by adopting this process. Now, I mentioned that there's very little of what you're going to hear that you haven't heard before. And this is a big deal for me. It's people don't use most of what they know because most of our day is by habit. So if 95% of your day is by habit, getting more information, simply getting more information is not a very good solution because you're only impacting that 5% of the day that's not by habit. What we want to do is update the habits that align with what we know. And I like to say to know and not do is to not know. It's not quite accurate. It's more accurate to say to know and not do is not much better than not knowing, but I like the way I say it because it flows. The point is, it's the same. If you don't do what you already know, then why bother knowing more information? Isn't it better to understand how to use more of what you know? And that's what we're doing here. So yes, you've heard it before. One of the things I like to ask people to do in these talks is to slow down and accept that there might be some new information. Put your preconceived notions aside. Some of the things I say will bring up associations. And when you feel that telling tension come up or you feel that resistance come up, gently put it aside. You don't want to suppress it because it just makes it grow. Just say, hey, in 45 minutes, this thing will be over, and then we'll make an assessment as to where everything is. Make a note of it if you have to. But you want to keep that down. One of the challenges is that the system wants to get out of unfamiliarity. It wants to get back to the familiar. And the older you are, the more likely that's happening. You know, we've been operating out of habit, 95% by habit, since probably mid-30s for most of us. Some even earlier than that. And if you're in your 50s, that is a well-honed path. It's like unfamiliar, boom, make it familiar. Unfamiliar, make it familiar. And in that making it familiar, we discount it. So what'll happen is I'll say something and a person might say, oh, that's just like, oh, that's just like, oh, that's just like. And every time you do that, what you're doing is diminishing the information that's coming in and making it like something you already know, but we already know that knowing is not doing. And if what you knew was working, then you wouldn't be wanting something different. And that's why I talk about so much, I focus so much on to know and not do is to not know. So today we're going to step into the step 3, and to give you a quick review, let's pull this slide up. So this is the 7-step reset. And you see right at the top, you can't stop the 33,000 stimulus response cycles every day. What you can do, though, is you can change how you respond to them. So this whole idea of the 33,000 stimulus response cycles happening over and over and over every day, and you heard me say earlier 100,000. The reason I say 100,000 is because if you look at micro stimulus response cycles, you see that there's multiple of those happening in a second. Again, you can Google this and make your own assessment. And so 100,000 times we have this quarter of a second that happens. And if we get a handle on those quarters of a second, what you'll notice happens to get easier and easier and easier. And the reason it gets easier is because this response includes the reset. And this reset is right here. Mindfulness, return to the present moment. And when you do that, you're priming yourself back for the step one. If this is not done in an effective way and you're allowing your stress from this last stimulus response cycle to carry through, then you're priming yourself here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So the 7 steps, the first step and the second step are in the pre-stimulus phase. This is our ongoing state. I would say that step 1 is who you are as at a given time. This is your your beliefs, your neuroplasticity, how susceptible you are to priming, how much you're using priming for yourself as an empowerment catalyst versus as a resistance factor. And then mindset, are you living mostly out of a growth mindset or a fixed mindset? But more importantly, can you get back to a growth mindset very quickly? People don't realize that you can have a growth mindset in an area, but in subtopics of that area, you have a fixed mindset. And they don't even realize it because they're walking around thinking, oh, I have a growth mindset. You have to have a growth mindset at each stimulus response cycle. So think about it having 33,000 stimulus response cycles a day. You want to have a growth mindset at each one of those. So that means you have to get back to a growth mindset in seconds, not minutes, not hours. So you have to monitor it. And that's what step 2 is about. By the way, I left off physiology. So physiology in step 1, how we stand, whether we have a courageous posture or a defeated posture, it goes a long way. Our breathing, what's our breathing like? What's our energy level, our rest, nutrition, all of those things go into physiology. Step 2 is a check-in. So if step 1 is our preparation, this is why we work, this is why we do what we do, this is why we exercise, why we do deep practice, why we meditate. That's what's improving step 1. And by the way, meditation is not necessary to be able to do this. You don't need to have special beliefs. It's not manifestation. This is science aligned with science, specifically neuroscience, and it's how the system works. So my whole focus is on the network of neurons. That's the 95% of our lives. It's in that network of neurons. And I focus there as opposed to other areas. There are other factors. And like I said, you can meditate and that would improve this. And what meditation also does is that any step in here, I can very quickly get back to a calm state. Now, step 2, I call it the check-in because this is happening all the time. You can see, where am I? Where am I in my mental state? What about my physical state? What about my spiritual state? What about my emotional state? What's my state of being like? My self-talk, what's my self-image? Am I using defeated self-talk? Am I degrading myself, or is it more positive? And then you have your conditioned reaction. And this is where we're going to talk about today, the conditioned reaction. But step 4 would be your response. So this is happening in the network of neurons. This is what people think of as the subconscious. I now see stuff talking about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And while that's all involved, and I'd love to talk about that, you don't need to understand that. That's like getting back into, is it a throttle body or a carburetor, right? You don't need to know that when you step on the accelerator, the car goes. So this is about a quarter of a second, 20 to 50 milliseconds. And this next one is the response. This is where the conscious mind comes in. So here's the big problem with people trying to change habits, is that your conditioned reaction is happening in a quarter of a second. And the reaction time of the network of neurons is anywhere from 150 to 250 milliseconds. So trained athletes you see them reacting. That's quick reaction is like 150 milliseconds. Typically, you're going to see about a quarter of a second, 250 milliseconds. Maybe we're distracted and what have you. And if you're really distracted, it could be a little bit longer. But to put that in perspective, you've seen videos of cats probably jumping. Their reaction time is in the 50 to 80 millisecond range. Dogs have a reaction time of about 150 milliseconds. And then trained athletes who are doing specific training to improve their reaction time, like Formula One drivers, race car drivers, they get theirs down to like 150 milliseconds. But using 250, then what we have is the conscious mind doesn't come online for another quarter of a second. So you have a quarter of a second here and a quarter of a second here. But then the other thing is the network of neurons is processing information at 11 million bits per second. So in that quarter of a second, you could have processed 2 to 3 million bits of information. The conscious mind only processes at 50 bits per second, much, much slower. So there's a filtering process that happens that we can talk about. And that filtering process lets through what we need or what it thinks is important. The subconscious doesn't have a mind. It's not a mind. It's just associations. But the filtering process is using associations from our conscious to give us what it thinks we need. This is why when you set goals, all of a sudden you start seeing serendipity come along. Or maybe when you set a big goal, the first thing you do is start seeing obstacles. It's the same thing. It's your system recognize that this is important. It's going to start making associations, and depending on where you are here in step 2, either you're going to see reasons why you can't do it, or you'll see reasons why you can. This is a very important step here. And so we want to give our conscious mind another quarter of a second. So you got a quarter second here, then it comes online in another quarter of a second, hour and a half. If you can give yourself another quarter of a second to 3/4 of a second, that at least gives you a chance to process 12 and a half bits of information. But that's better than letting your reaction equal your response. That's what we do not want to do. We don't want the reaction to be our response, because the reaction is from the past and it's based on past solutions, and it's likely not what's needed right now. And then once you make that conscious choice, and there's things we can do to improve that 12 and a half seconds, out of scope for this high level. And then we have emotional modulation. Emotional modulation is where we get back on track. So if a person is triggered, you may have seen where somebody's triggered and they're in this heightened state and they're getting irrational. We want to catch that early, and it takes about 90 seconds to fully process an emotion. You can do it in less than that. So this may add a minute and a half to this cycle. This whole cycle is going to be less than a second. But this modulation step, if you need to do it, could add another 90 seconds to it. And the reason we want to do that is because we don't want to be taking action from that triggered state, because it's probably going to be wrong. Unless you're fighting a real tiger. If you're fighting a real tiger, then your reaction will equal your action, right? We're going to skip all of this because we're fighting this tiger, and we're going to trust our 11 million bits processing over this. But when you're in a meeting, we don't want to trust our 11 million bits processing, especially when it's based on fear. And I'll talk about that in today's piece. And so the action, I just have do it, delegate it, delay it, dump it. And that's a way for you to think about what that action is going to be. And if you are being triggered here, if you do need to modulate your emotions, you can delay it. You can say, hey, you know what, let's take this offline. We'll get back together in about an hour. And it'll give you a chance to process. And then the step 7, as I mentioned, is mindfulness. So we get back to a present moment. We get back to calm. And you can use box breathing. You can use 1 minute moments. And I would do 1 minute moments just throughout the day until you get a handle on this. You don't need to do long meditations. Nothing against those. Those are going to enhance things. And the more you meditate, the easier it is to step back into a calm state, a present moment state. But you can get a lot of the benefit with 1 minute moments. I first encountered that book in 2014, and that was where it started for me, because I did not like meditating, because back from my martial arts days, it was introduced. It was a very arduous, painful it wasn't a pleasant process, and I didn't see much benefit from it because of the way we were doing it. And but I used those 1 minute moments to start getting back into this, and then I've done the longer meditations. I'm not a meditator. I don't have anything against it, but I've achieved some of the same results doing different things. And I'll probably spend more time when I get to step 7. What I'm doing now is doing a deeper dive on each of the steps because I've done enough videos or live events on the overview, but I go through so quickly. So this is why we're spending some time on the individual ones. So let's get out of that screen. Now, in the step 3, this is the conditioned reaction. This is the quarter of a second where things happen very, very quickly. And it's where a lot of your habit change work tends to gravitate towards because this understanding of the 7 steps is not known. And there are 4 areas within that quarter of a second that we can do something about. And what I'll do here is lay that out. Now, one of the reasons I'm doing this is because of the massive layoffs that have gone on in the United States and people out of work, and just the uncertainty. There's multiple things going on geopolitically. There's trade wars going on, capital wars in a way. You got what's going to be the dominant currency. Then you have the technology wars with chips and artificial intelligence. So there's so much going on. People don't know where things are going to be. But what you can do is be steady. So like in Good to Great, he talks about the simple, this is great by choice, I'm sorry, simple, methodical, and consistent. That's what we want. And let the chaos and the VUCA go on all around us. So sometimes think people have to respond to every single thing. If you get real steady and let the VUCA circulate around you, what you'll notice is that there is a reversion to the mean, and you'll also notice that the world tends to revert to principles. So if you build your process, if you build your steady state based on principles, you can rest assured that the world will continue to conform around you because you're basing it on principles. Rather than you trying to conform here and there and there, just focus the principles. There's different ways to get principles. Again, we could talk about all these things individually. So here's where we're going to go today. So we have this step 3. And step 3 is conditioned reaction. And I make the distinction between conditioned reaction and response because they are different. A reaction is automatic. That's what's coming from the associations. The reaction is automatic. The response is your conscious choice. Your response is how you are interpreting what that reaction could have been and then making an adjustment so that it makes more sense for your life design. So this is the conditioned reaction stage. And what we want to do is make sure that we have a pause, and then we're handing it off to step 4, which is our response. So if I take this and wall off step 2, which was our state, and this state is priming us and prepping us for these conditioned reactions that happen over and over and over. Now think about the conditioned reaction. People understand this because they'll talk about muscle memory. You'll practice something, maybe if you play sports, you'll practice a move, a response to something. That's a conditioned reaction. You're conditioning that in. Well, what happens in business and in life and sports, we get survival reactions. If you race or you do track days, you'll know there's a survival reaction. And what you want to do is have the right survival reaction. So a race car driver automatically is going to be tracking out as the rear end comes around. They're already trained to do that. A brand new driver, when the rear steps out, they might turn the wrong way. The conditioned reaction is not right. Another one is, to put this in perspective, if you take a motorcyclist, when you are faced with an emergency, a cross traffic situation, hold on. Riding a motorcycle, if you're faced with a cross traffic situation, which is the most common CARTA motorcycle problems or incidents, what you would do in a car is you would now just hit the brakes as hard as you can because of anti-lock braking, right? You can hit the brakes as hard as you can. You don't have to worry about skidding, and people straighten their arms out. Now, where did this come from? I got it from watching my parents. That's what my parents would do. As a matter of fact, my aunt would put her hand out, and that becomes a conditioned reaction. I had to teach myself I don't have to put my hand out, because that was what my brain picked up from age 0 to 7. That's how conditioning happens. It sees the parent driving and putting their arms out. Well, that's not even a good thing to do in a car, because when you are here, you can't steer well. It's having loose. If you watch race car drivers, they're loose on the steering wheel because you want to have micro movements. But the problem comes in when you're on a motorcycle. If you do this on a motorcycle, you lose your control of the bike. You're basically just going to go straight. And motorcycles have a great opportunity. If the car comes out in front of them, instead of running into the car with the brakes on, because it happens so fast, they can brake and then do what's called a quick flick turn and go behind the vehicle. So that means you don't want to be here. You want to be here, and then you look and turn and go behind the vehicle. So whether it's making a U-turn, whether it's coming out of an intersection, whatever it's doing, where the car was is most likely clear. It's unlikely the car behind them is going to be right on their bumper, one, because they see this unfolding and their eyes are probably wide open watching you. The other thing that happens when you do this is it gives the car driver a chance to respond. If you're doing this, they freeze and they don't know what to do. They're frozen. And this has happened to me real time. If you do this and go behind them, their quarter of a second catches up, and then they pull out. And that quarter of a second, you can see it when you're walking down a hallway or a sidewalk towards someone else, and they go one side and then you go that same side, and they go the other side and you go to that same side. That's that quarter of a second lag that I'm talking about. So in that sense, on the walking on the sidewalk, you pick a side and just stay. Pick a side and stay with that, and they'll adjust. The same way this happens, if you go here, the driver, a quarter of a second, it picks up, they pull out, and then you're clear. There have been times where I've done that, and I still may have clipped the rear bumper of the car, but because they pulled out, I was safe. That is an example of a conditioned reaction, but also an example of what I'm talking about today, because what I've done there is called an implementation intention. This is where we're going to start influencing what happens in this conditioned reaction. So if this here is the quarter of a second, I'm sorry, let me do it a different way. The reaction time between the stimulus and the reaction is a quarter of a second. So now we're just about out of this thing. We're out of this area. And what we wanted to do is use the pre stimulus and the post stimulus, the immediate pre and the immediate post, and start influence what our reaction will be. So this is the work. If you want to change your habits, if you want to create new habits, this is where you can do it. So the first thing I'm going to use is visualization. So with visualization, you can imagine yourself in a situation and then doing the right response. Situation, right response. If you ride a motorcycle, sticking with the motorcycle, well, let's do something else. Let's do sports because you're familiar with that. If if you see a person fake, let's say you're playing basketball and the person does a fake, if you can condition yourself to not go at the first fake, you can visualize yourself waiting a split second or maybe looking at their legs to see which way they go or looking at their hips to see which way they go. That's visualizing a so you don't get faked out by the shoulders or you don't get faked out by the hands or the ball. You look at their hips and wait for the hips to go. That would be a way of visualizing yourself. I a similar example using the motorcycle, what I was talking about before. I encourage people, motorcycle riders, to get in a parking lot and ride down like the lane, an empty parking lot, ride down where the lane is, and imagine a car coming out, and then you braking and going to the right. You brake, and then you release the brakes, and you go to the behind them, left, right. You do it to both sides, but in the U.S. it's typically going to be to the right. The reason you brake is to slow down, scrub off a little bit of speed. You'd be amazed at how much a difference is going from 38 miles per hour to 32 miles per hour when it comes to doing that quick flick turn. So just slow down a little bit and then you release the brakes. With ABS, you could get away without releasing them, but you brake and then you go. You train that. You literally train that. So that's taking the visualization to another level because now you're visualizing the thing happening and you're putting the action in. Another one, and this is really powerful. I've seen motorcyclists rear end cars, like, and what you can do is riding down the parking lot, get up to about 30 miles per hour, and you can use the stalls as reference points. So you're in the middle of a stall, you're middle of a stall going through, and you imagine a car stops in front of you, they brake hard, you want to squeeze the brakes and then just jog over to that white line. So you're in the middle of the parking stall, which is not the best place to be, but let's say you're in the middle of the parking stall, you hit the brakes, and then you just slide over and you go on that white line. In practice, what that looks like is when the cars stop, instead of you getting on the brakes and hoping you stop, you just automatically go between the cars because that white line, 90% of the time, 95% of the time is going to be clear. Now, what could happen, to be fair, is the car in front of you may have stopped short because the car in front of them stopped, and maybe they're planning on doing the same thing. So you have to be aware of that. And depending on which side that lane is, so let's say you're in the left lane of the freeway and the shoulder's over there, rather than go for the shoulder, which makes sense, I might go for the right side. And you could train both of those. You could train both of those. You can imagine, okay, the shoulders over there, I'm gonna go to the right side. Shoulders over there, I'm gonna go to the right side. And you'll see that the next time you're in that situation, it doesn't take long. You do that 2 or 3 times because the body wants to survive, right? It just doesn't know what to do. It thought that this was surviving, putting the hands out in front. Uh, that's not how you survive that on a motorcycle. So that's an example of how you can visualize, and then we're getting into what's called implementation intention. That's kind of what that is. Now, you could do this for business, you can do it in sports. So I just gave you an example of combining visualization with implementation intention, that when this thing happens, what I'm going to do is I'll do this. When that happens, I'll do this. In this case, it's when somebody stops in front of me, I will shift over to the right, or I'll shift over to the left. That's the implementation intention. In business, it might be when somebody attacks me verbally. Maybe there's we're in a debate and then they attack me personally. When that happens, I'm going to relax and do a box breath and let that play out. I'm going to let them finish and leave some silence there so they could feel awkward. And then I'm going to respond from a meta standpoint about the ad hominem attack. And by doing that, you are conditioning yourself so when you're in that situation, you're not coming back from a triggered place. It's just an example. You could do it when if you're a leader, you have an employee, you can do the implementation intention where you see somebody, because that's what happens in state 2, right? They start going into higher beta brainwave, they start prepping for fight or flight, and you're having a leadership conversation. You can imagine when you see those first signals that they're stressing out, that you back off and you say, you know what, let's take a pause there. What's coming up for you? You could implementation intention. So now what we're doing is we're influencing this part. We're influencing this part with the implementation intention because the stimulus came in, but before the reaction happens, you've already influenced it with an implementation intention that you're going to do it this way. Same thing as sales. If a person says no, you want to condition yourself to how you're going to respond to that, because that's just the first signal. You're expecting a no anyway. Most salespeople tell you that the sales they make are after the person says no. So this is an easy step right there. And visualization, implementation, intention, they're very similar. I would tell you to do them differently. So visualization, you can just sit there while you're meditating and start, or with your eyes closed, relaxing. You can start visualizing yourself doing the things that you want. They've actually had studies where pianists were visualizing, practicing the piano, and they could actually, the musculature in their fingers would actually change. Now, we've known that athletes visualize. We've known this for years, and we've seen in some pictures where the skiers visualizing, and you'll see their body moving with it. That's because the neurons are actually firing. You're literally firing neural pathways. So when you think about building with myelin and synaptogenesis, which I talked about yesterday, when you do that, you are creating associations. Visualization creates associations. People believe that when it comes to physical, right? You have muscle memory. They believe that works. It's not muscle memory, it's nervous system memory. The same way that you build associations in the network of neurons for what's called muscle memory, it's actually nervous system memory, the same thing works with business. The same thing works with leadership. The same thing works with management, with managing others. Same thing works with sales. It works with everything. Raising your children. You can build those associations in. This is how we start moving from the to not know is to know and not do is to not know. That's how we move from there to knowing and doing. This is how we move from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to conscious incompetence, and then to conscious competence, and then to unconscious competence. That's the process we're moving through. So I'm still on the pre side, visualization, implementation, intention. Now on the post side, the reaction's already happened. But what we can do is create this handoff. In the book, The MacGyver Method, this is the writer of the MacGyver series, where the star character would come up with these cool solutions with the gadgets, just things that he could find. And he would come up with these solutions. And the writer, his process, he wrote a book about it. His process was when he comes up with a difficult thing, he would hand it off to the subconscious, his subconscious, is the way he talks about it in the book. He would say, I need you to, here's the problem. I need you to come up with this solution, and I'll check back in at 7 o'clock. And then he'll go off and do something completely different. And he'll come back, and sure enough, he has that answer. There's another thing I remember reading about the original Walt Disney. He had, what he would do is, for his creativity, he would come up with the creation, then he would go into another room, and I think it was the critic second, and he would criticize that creation, and then he would come into a third room and then kind of put it together. You can do the same thing by imagining yourself putting on a different hat. Okay, first I've got my creation hat on. Then I'm going to take that creation hat off, and now I'm going to put on my critic hat. And you just imagine it, and then tear it down, and then come back and put on my reconciliation hat. And these are things that you can do using the subconscious, but a little off topic here. So the one thing you can do is a handoff, and you don't have to wait until 7 o'clock. I've experimented with this plenty. You can actually set your subconscious, set your network of neurons to automatically do this. So remember, there's a gap here. Your reaction happens within a quarter of a second. Now you have a gap while the conscious is coming on, and typically you're just going to be waiting. It happens fast. A quarter of a second is quick, and if you're not careful, what will happen is more associations will kick in. They say neurons that wire together, fire together. So now you have more neurons coming together, more and more coming together. And by the time the conscious mind comes on, the house is on fire, and everybody's going to burn up, right? It's a major fight or flight. So rather than let that happen, you can condition in this handoff that, for example, problem solving. Use the problem solving first step. So instead of just hand off what's the problem, you this risk, you want it to hand off the first step of problem solving, which is clearly define the problem. So that's what we can do on the post. Now in it, we have this, there's something that we can do here, right in here. And that's called a swish pattern. I'll just have you look that up. You can look up swish pattern. Essentially what a swish pattern does is it enters into this stimulus reaction cycle. And so like if I was doing this braking thing, I might go from seeing the brake lights come on, and then as soon as the brake lights come on, I would blow that picture up, like explode it. That picture would explode, and I'd see myself doing this, going over to the side with the motorcycle, or to that side. And in practice, you can do this with getting rid of ums. You can imagine yourself about to say and as the sound is coming out, you explode that picture, and you make a picture of yourself getting a standing ovation. I'm using speaking as an example. And in the swish pattern, the first picture, you'll be associated. You'll be looking through your own eyes. So I'll see my headlight, I'll see the tail lights in the first picture. And then you blow that picture up and you explode that picture and you replace it with the picture from dissociated. So I'm seeing myself on the motorcycle going to the side, or I see myself from up above watching myself with the standing ovation. This is the way the subconscious understands it. It's an effective way. So that's how I can change inside that stimulus response. This is, again, how you move from knowing and not doing to knowing and doing, because you start to swish in these things, and it's the way to get a handle on that quarter of a second. The other thing that you can do is change this whole thing. And by changing the whole thing, we use a positivity exercise. In the positivity exercise, we're going to reset the conditioned response mechanism. Now, if you go back, if you look at a lot of what's going on with neuroscience, it makes sense when you consider a 10,000-year-old human brain, which for the most part, it was a hunter-gatherer. right? I mean, we've only had cars and things like that for a couple of hundred years. So imagine we were in a hunter-gatherer type setting for the majority, vast majority of that 10,000 years. And so it makes sense that we are conditioned to look for danger. We're looking for that tiger. We're looking for that threat. We're looking for the enemy coming over the hill. We're looking for whatever. And the network of neurons are set to be biased towards threats. So it's looking for threats first before it looks for positive. And that's why you get so anxious. That's why headlines and news, they love the negatives. Not that they love it, it's this that's what works. The negative gets people's attention. When you're scrolling through something, you don't see it, then you're not really engaged, but your subconscious is picking up. Remember, it processes at 11 million bits per second. So it's picking up information. You're just scrolling through, then all of a sudden something negative comes in and you stop and you look at that. So we want to switch that around. So instead of going 80% threat, we want to change that to 20% threat. And we're going to have 80% neutral or assessment. And that's what we're going to switch it to. And the way we're going to do that is with this positivity exercise. So for 3 days, 3 times a day for 6 weeks, you're going to do this. It takes 90 seconds. 3 times, you're going to come up with some negative experience, something that's caused you to be in a worse position. I use the example of a flat. You get a flat tire, now you're late for work, and now these other things happen, or you're late for a meeting, or you miss a sale because you got that flat tire. That's a negative experience. What we're going to do is in 30 seconds, because you do this 3 times, that's where I get my 90 seconds. You're going to imagine the flat tire, and as that feeling comes on about the dread of the flat tire, you're going to quickly switch to being grateful you have a car. I call it the greater positive context. Now, this is not positive mental attitude. This is not reframing. You are training your subconscious the same way a person, you might see them training a dog. As the person walks by, they're taking the dog's head and turning it back to them, or they're moving the dog into the position. They're training it. You're working on your associations. You're working on your network of neurons. You imagine the dread of the flat tire, and you immediately go to the positive context, the greater positive context. This is not the greater good. It's the greater positive context. The thing that exists that allows the flat, right? So if I didn't have a car, I wouldn't have a flat. But the car was once a goal, so I want the car. The car is the greater positive context. I'm grateful that I have the car. And then you spend 10 seconds in that gratitude of I have the car. You could also think could happen, you get chewed out at a meeting at work. And the first thought is, or you get chewed, something happens, you have a bad glitch at a meeting, and you're thinking about how that's negative. And as soon as you feel that feeling come up about the glitch, you immediately focus on the gratitude for having this job. I'm grateful I'm working, other people are not. And then so what we're going to do is every day, 3 times a day, come up with a different one. You don't want to do the same one over and over and over. You want to look inside, come up with something, just whatever comes up, right? Whatever negative experience comes up, and immediately look for the greater positive context. You're training your subconscious to look for the greater positive context. You get laid off. This is a bad thing, right? You get laid off, and that's going to be something that haunts you, and you don't want those emotions during this process while you're looking for a job. So when you get laid off, you might you could very quickly, as that comes up, you think, I'm so grateful I got this experience I can now use in my next position. I'm grateful for the experience I can use in my next position. Again, it's not positive mental attitude. It's not reframing. You're training your subconscious. And the reason it takes 6 weeks is because there's 2 things happening. One, you're working through all of that built up emotion that has to ride out. That's what has to come out. is you're bringing those, you're neutralizing all of those. So you're literally relieving yourself of some of the negative emotions that you have in your system. But the other thing you're doing is you're training your subconscious to immediately look for the greater positive context. So imagine 11 million bits per second, it's processing through. And when you do this greater positive context, when the subconscious looks for the greater positive context and it finds it, oh, yeah, but I have a car, it moves on to look for threats again, right? It's like, oh, that's not a tiger, that's a bush. It moves on to look for threats. Or that's not a tiger, that's my pet. It moves on and looks for threats. By doing that, you will shift the subconscious from looking at the negative 80% of the time to looking at neutral 80% of the time. I put the 20% there, it's arbitrary, but the point is you're still going to be aware of threats. It's just that we don't see a tiger every day, not even every week, not even every month. So why have this system that's designed to spot tigers, and then it makes things that are benign into tigers? It just doesn't make sense for us to be walking around in fight or flight for no reason. And especially if you're in between work, you don't want to wake up every day dreading the fact that you got laid off. You want to very quickly get past that. So you can take that, and you in sports, maybe you lost a match and it was because of one move, rather than dwelling on that, because you don't want to build neurons, you don't want to build myelation around that negative thing. You very quickly say, yeah, I'm glad I was in the Final Four. The fact that you could lose in the Final Four, you couldn't lose in the Final Four if you weren't in the Final Four, and being in the Final Four was once a goal. So that's the greater positive content. No, this is just part of the process. That's what you're training your subconscious to do. Now, I mentioned reframing. Reframing is a part of this because it can happen way out here. So the other thing that we have is reframe. And in reframing, you're changing. So I used to say this, I still do sometimes. Telling ain't selling, asking is. I'm reframing the idea of, instead of telling, I go to asking. Selling ain't telling, asking is. And it's a reframe that if I say it enough, then when I find myself talking too much in a sales situation, I remember to ask questions. This could be where affirmations come in, and the reason why there are people who say affirmations don't work, it's not true. They do work. They're just limited in what they can do, because there's other factors. There's willpower, there's anxiety, there's the sympathetic nervous system being in fight or flight, norepinephrine being in your system, etc. But they do work. But if you reframe it enough, then when the stimulus happens, it's the same thing as doing an implementation intention. The more intense the threat is, or the more intense the habit is, the more we're going to benefit from visualization and implementation. Reframing tends to take a back seat because the threat is so big and comes in so fast. So that is a way to start getting at this quarter of a second. There are many, many more levers that we can use, and it's easier to talk about it when there is a specific situation that we're working on, because each situation has a signature of what's causing it, what's the limiting, what is the limiting factor in it, and then we can focus on that. But there are so many opportunities, and the big one is deep practice. So that's another one I would put over here on the on this side. I would add deep practice. And this is the most effective. Deep practice is the most effective because I can actually grow myelin. I can actually build myelin, and myelin makes the neural pathways fire faster, stronger, with more accuracy and more reliably. So by using deep practice, you'll build myelin and you'll build up neurotransmitter. And that neurotransmitter is what's in between. So if you have 100 billion neurons and each neuron is connected to 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons, the synapses is in between, and that's what's connecting them. And so the more neurotransmitter we have, the more likely we have an abundance of neurotransmitter to make those transfers or those communication transfers happen between the neurons. And that's why so it's called synaptogenesis. Synaptogenesis is the process of the system moving the neurotransmitter from dormant, so to speak, neural pathways over to active neural pathways, but the brain is stingy on neurotransmitter. So there are things you can do with deep practice, and there's other tools we have to raise the amount of neurotransmitter. And the more neurotransmitter you have, the more myelin you're going to wrap, and the more connections you're going to have, the stronger your connections are going to have, because the synaptogenesis happens more easily. So deep practice is a big one. And again, that's why it's more prescriptive. Once I see what we're dealing with, it's a lot easier to start applying deep practice. But you probably use deep practice in sports. If I was talking to a person the other day about lacrosse, and what they can do is throw the ball at the wall and trying to hit a square, and then moving back, keep moving back, and hit that square. And then when they start having trouble hitting the square, instead of staying at that point back there, let's say it's 30 feet back, instead of staying there, what they would do is come back to 10 feet and make a smaller square, and then move back, hitting that smaller square, and then when they get to 30 feet. The reason why we're doing this is because we're training two things. We're training the signal, that's the myelin and synaptogenesis, and we're training the actual muscle fibers. So the muscle fibers take a longer time to build up around that. They have to tear down, and remember, memory's in the nervous system, not the muscles. So the muscles have to groove, get that groove and strengthen. And so that's why I have them go back in to 10 feet away with a smaller circle, move back, and then go back in 10 feet away to a small square. And then you can maybe do it on an angle. Maybe you can go 10 feet and move the square over to the side. So you're here and you do turn, bam, do bam, right? And that way you're working different aspects of this. This is a way to apply deep practice. If I was training somebody or working with somebody who's trying to get a piano piece done or a guitar piece, instead of practicing the whole song, which is what people tend to do, which means they're using the associations to create more of the same association. What you would do is just have them practice that one segment. I may have them go way inside that one segment or that one riff, and practice that over. And what the objective is to get 5 times in a row perfect. 5 times in a row perfect. Then you could do things like playing around with slowing down and speeding up, and then move that riff out, and then connect it to the prior association. So this is how deep practice is applied. You want to use short bursts. And again, you can Google this. The Talent Code by Dan Coyle does a good job of talking about the deep practice, as does Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. Both of those get into it. So there's plenty of information about this. You can design your own. But the point is understanding that the habits live in the neurons and the neural pathways. And so you want to work on those as opposed to just knowing more information. I'm going to leave it there. And again, feel free to join me. Use those links. It's in the chat. You can use the link. The link to join me on stage changes. You can always go out to this 7stepreset.com/live. You go to that website and you'll get updated videos and other past videos. So if you want to get more information, like once I go through these in depth, you can go back and find one that's just about step 2, just about step 3, just about step 4, etc. So I will not be going live on Saturday and Sunday. I'll go live on Monday, and on Monday we'll be talking about the response. I'll do a quick review, and then we'll get into the response step. That's the next one. All right. See you next time.